You are listening to the Queens of Quality podcast. This podcast will discuss some of the basic and not so basic impacts of compliance and quality within the pharmaceutical and biotech industries. We have a balance of laughter and education as we discuss the misconceptions about quality assurance within an organization. We are your hosts, Jen and Michelleanne. Let's get ready to start the show. Welcome to the Queens of Quality. I am Michelleanne Bradley, and my Queens of Quality co-host is Jen DiMarco. Jen has over 25 years of experience in the life sciences and pharma industry. She worked in quality management roles through the entirety of the product life cycle, including commercial organization that implemented a CIA consent decree. She brings a unique perspective. She has a chemistry degree, 2 masters, one in business and the other in quality assurance and regulatory affairs, and is a Sigma 6 black belt. She operates where the disciplines of business, science, and operational efficiency converge. Jen has a keen understanding as to how these areas impact one another. This experience, along with her sense of humor, is why she is a key Metis consultant and why I personally wanted to work with her on this podcast.
Thanks so much, Michelleanne. And if I could, Michelleanne Bradley has over 20 years of experience in the life sciences and pharma industry. She has worked in clinical settings, pharmacovigilance, IT, quality management, and consulting roles. She has been in the quality department. She's been in the safety department. More specifically, she has been the safety department and has also worked for some of the largest pharmaceutical organizations in the world. Clearly, she has a breadth of experience from small and the N of 1 to being amongst many in the team. Her focus in the industry was predominantly in opening lines of communication between internal and external groups. She is interested in working with emerging markets, especially Latin America, is fluent in Spanish as well. And she's founded Metis in 2016 and has continued to expand the vision and service capabilities ever since. I'm really excited to be here with you today and to be part of the Queens of Quality.
Yay. All right. So today,
Episode 1.
There we go. So why are we doing this podcast? There are so many one-offs that we run into within the world of GXP in so many companies where there are some really basic and highly concerning misconceptions about what the responsibilities are within the GXP spaces. We make things harder than they need to be. It is human nature. So let's lighten this up a little, bring some humor and some humanity into this, and build the quality framework so that we can focus on the fun parts, making better medicine and devices to improve quality of life for patients.
I know when we first started to talk about this, Michelleanne, we were kind of, back and forth, is this something that people would want to know? And, would we really have anything to say? And then we started to talk about our first topic, which is why it's our first topic. And it became the springboard actually for the Queens of Quality as it exists today. So I will ask the question and get the conversation started. Michelleanne, what do you see the difference between compliance and quality as?
Okay. So in the way that it works in my head is that quality is the action and compliance is the output. Because if you have the quality system, then you have a compliant output.
Great.
And then Jen.
So for me, compliance is the strategy and the quality piece ends up being how the strategy is executed. So essentially the quality is the tactics. And I had a mentor once who talked about compliance as a verb, and I was so confused because I'm like, no, it's not. It's a noun. And she was like, okay, think about it. You had to do something to be compliant with something. And that with something also made a huge impact on me as well, because there's always a frame of reference that you have to utilize in order to demonstrate you're being compliant with it, whether it's the GMPs or the GCPs or any other law associated, with the regulatory environment. You have to be compliant with something. And then in order to be compliant, you have to have those quality processes in place and quality oversight and that quality culture that ensures that you're actually executing to the point where you can produce a high quality output.
Exactly. And the reason that we're talking about this topic in this episode is because we're setting the foundation and defining the framework, because we use the same words and they have different meanings. So,
all the time.
Yes. Yes.
Right.
And so this was a classic example of how we use the same words and they have different meanings. And we see this throughout, especially within our industry, right?
Right.
Like, you say coding to a PV group and it means different than when you say coding to an IT group.
Exactly. And people use, especially compliance and quality, they use those terms interchangeably.
Right.
And it's like, well, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
What are you talking about? And it becomes it's a very interesting dynamic, especially when we talk about the corporate culture and, what is the organization's approach to these topics, because they are different topics.
Yes.
And I love that you talked about the foundational pieces and the framework, because I think in pictures and I talk in analogies and, kind of the real world application type of thing. And the immediate thought that comes to mind for me is the idea of building a house.
Yep.
And that foundation is perfect. That's the quality in my terminology of quality and my definition of it. The foundational piece is quality.
Yep.
And the framework, it comes from your quality organization. The plans, and this is where I come back to the strategy piece for compliance, like your architectural plans are your compliance piece. And then even kind of, if you want to take it one step further, the roof, it becomes the compliance piece as well, because you want to keep it all under the same umbrella. So there's a couple of different ways to kind of work in the concepts of quality and compliance within the construct of building your organization.
Exactly. And without the solid foundation, without the structural framework, you're always putting out the fires instead of preventing them. You're always preventing the collapse of the system without being able to rely on that.
Exactly.
And so I think that it's really important that we do set that framework and do emphasize like communication between departments, making sure that there is that quality framework.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. I've had clients say, well, I just need to make sure my house, my shop is okay, and my house is okay, kind of thing. And it's a really great idea. And if I kind of apply that to that house idea, you can have a fabulous kitchen, but what if your bathroom doesn't function or it's not plumbed well? As you talk about the communication lines, like what if your IT function, IT goes through all of the different rooms, as it were, so what if, your IT infrastructure wasn't necessarily able to support this fantastic kitchen that you want to have?
Right. Exactly.
It's like every other construction project that you may have had.
Right. And to go back to the roof analogy, when I bought my house, it was a fixer-upper. And I had a colleague at the time who didn't understand why putting in a new kitchen wasn't my first priority, but putting a new roof on was.
Right.
And no matter how many times I explained, if I have an amazing kitchen and the roof caves in, then that's not going to work out.
You can't cook anymore in your amazing kitchen.
Right.
It's not supported by that. Yes.
Exactly.
Mhm.
So this is just one of the reasons that, the quality framework is critical.
Right.
So what does that look like?
Mm-hmm.
And that looks like communication between the departments, because
Right.
it's not always about the SOP, and it is about what the execution looks like.
Exactly. Right. Because you could have an SOP, and I'll just use that as a, kind of take that example. You can have an SOP that's really basic and will, as we say in the inspection world, pass the red face test kind of thing. That doesn't mean it's going to ensure that things are executed at a high quality.
Right.
And that all of the pertinent departments are working in the same fashion.
Yes.
I can't tell you how many SOPs, and something tells me you may have experienced this yourself, where I have an SOP that says I'm going to do something. You have an SOP that says you're going to do something, but I have to give you something in 5 days according to my SOP, and your SOP expects it within 3 days.
Right.
But I don't. So immediately, Jen's putting me out of compliance with my SOP.
Right.
And that, again, that tension gets built within the organization. It's like, oh, well, you're not giving it to me when I need it. And the flip side of that is I didn't know you needed it then, because I'm being compliant with my SOP.
Right. And that's why it's really important to have any group that is touched by a process review for that, because
Right.
there are different facets to what goes on within the organization
Right.
that all need to come together to make things work out.
Mhm.
And what we're working toward here is success for everyone.
Right. Yep.
I know that sounds totally cheesy, but
No.
we want our clients to be successful. We want our clients to be successful within the framework of the regulations
Right.
from the international health authorities.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned it earlier. It's that communication piece.
Right.
Because if you're not talking to each other, and if you're not understanding what the right vernacular is, kind of bringing it back to our earlier, or our premise for this particular episode, is we need to speak the same language.
Right.
If you're not speaking the same language and haven't agreed to what those terms mean within your organization, you don't have a culture. That's where, again, those tensions start to happen, those
miscommunications,
those challenges between organizations, especially as, the quality organization, having worked in-house. I generally didn't show up in someone's office or call them on the phone because they're having a good day.
Right.
It's because something happened that went slightly askew. And that's how the quality organization got involved. And I can't tell you how many times it's like, oh, we can't tell quality, or, oh, I shouldn't say that because quality's here. It's like, well, that's really unfortunate, in terms of the culture, because that's how having that perspective, and understanding what the requirements are and understanding what the pitfalls might be, being an objective third party, if you're talking about audits and that type of thing, gives the functional areas the perspective and the objectivity to ensure that they are being successful from a regulatory perspective.
Yep. Absolutely. And, you can't go back to, it's very difficult to have the perspective of, oh my goodness, this went wrong. So we need to try to cover it up and fix it ourselves. We can't get somebody else involved in it. We can't get the quality group involved in it because we can't fix problems from the same place that we created them.
Right. Right. Because if nothing changes, nothing changes.
Right.
And it, again, kind of like thinking of the house analogy, right? If I screwed up the cabinets, am I really the right person to do it again? If I continue to do the same thing again, it's like, okay, well, like this is now the third time I've installed this and it's still not right. Well, there's a common theme there. And it's systemic, and that would be me. It could be the way that I'm reading the instructions, the way that I'm using the hammer or whatever you use to put in cabinets. I've never done that before. I have done tiling, but that's beside the point. But that's where, again, you're not objective because so many people I know take their work very personally.
Right.
And it takes a lot of courage and a lot of self-awareness to say, oh, I think I need help.
It does. Absolutely. And it takes another step beyond that to say, you know what? I was wrong about this.
Yep. And that's unfortunate that kind of approach is seen. It's that whole thing is, and I've seen it just in society a lot lately, as we talk about bringing the humanity into what we do. It's a matter of that emotional intelligence to say, I'm not the best person for this. Perhaps I need somebody to help me.
Right.
Or, when you have a leader who is of service versus a dictator kind of thing, it's like, I've seen the leaders of service kind of get looked at sideways kind of thing. Like, what are they doing? Because you could be authoritative and, order people around. But that's the old adage, is that you're leading out of fear versus respect.
Right.
And so many people end up being afraid, and there's this sense of fear that, oh my gosh, I have to be perfect. And no one is perfect. No one.
Right.
So that's where I actually really appreciate the quality and compliance space, because as much as I know that perfection is not a reality, how can we be the best version of ourselves that we can be?
Yeah. And how can we show up with that for our internal teams, for growing the circle larger? So there's your internal team, there's your internal department, there's, however the structure is of within the organization. But really, the bottom line is we are working to provide the highest quality, safest product for the clients, for the patients.
Right. Yep.
It's about the patients.
Absolutely. Ultimately, yeah. Right. Because if the patients aren't being taken care of, then we no longer have an industry.
Right.
Yeah.
And we see this. We see this all the time.
Yep. And I had, about the fear piece of it, and that things being anxiety provoking. I was doing an inspection preparation activity, so it wasn't even the actual inspection yet. And there was a person, it was their first time in terms of the inspection construct and understanding what that really meant. And they just had this look of, they were petrified kind of thing. It's like that, very much that deer in headlights, and their hands are shaking and their voice is shaking. And I hadn't even asked the question yet in character kind of thing. And I just took a pause because, luckily they were really the only person in the room kind of thing. And this is when we were actually in face-to-face scenarios as well. I went over to them, I sat next to them, and we kind of had a moment. And I'm like, okay, you need to breathe. And they're like, what? I'm like, let's just sit here and breathe a couple of things because this is all okay. And I said, this doesn't have to be a scary activity. You are very good at what you do. And they looked at me like I just told them the meaning of life. And I was like, this is your opportunity to tell people how good you are at what you do. You don't have to be perfect at what you do. So, but this is how you can demonstrate to them that you really do know what you're doing and that you are as good at your job as I know you are. And it completely changed the entire dynamic in the room.
Right.
Because they were like, they went in with that concern and fear of getting in trouble and saying the wrong thing. And I know their work. They had nothing to be afraid of kind of thing, so it's all really, it was very that mental, I call them the mental gymnastics that I am familiar with the mental gymnastics in a couple of different areas. Did I mention I'm not perfect? But that's where it was just kind of like, oh, okay. Like they're not there, and I have not been in a health authority inspection where somebody came in and, they were just going to, they had their shovel and they were just going to dig until they found something. And they were, because that's who they are. And like that, they were not aggressive at all.
Right.
And I have found when that happens, it's usually those being inspected who end up having that defensive mode. And, you call it the war room and it's us against them. And it's like, it just has such a unfortunate connotation and dynamic associated with it.
Absolutely.
It doesn't have to be confrontational.
Nope. And we're going to talk more about inspection and inspection readiness and
absolutely
how to prepare for inspections
mm-hmm.
and why regular audit prep is really important in our next episode.
Absolutely. Excellent.
So
fantastic.
Thank you so much for joining us. And please let us know what you think. Please let us know if we've helped. Please let us know if there are any topics that you want us to cover in future episodes. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Michelleanne.
Thanks, Jen.
Thank you for listening to the Queens of Quality podcast. To continue the conversation, please follow our LinkedIn profile, Metis Consulting Services, or for additional resources, visit our website at metisconsultingservices.com. You can listen to the show free anywhere you find podcasts. Love the show? Don't forget to subscribe, like, review, and share with others. Thank you again for listening, and we'll see you next time.